I worked as a communications operator on the reconnaissance ship Whisper, and do you know what the most terrifying thing in space is? It's not black holes, not radiation, and not even the chance that your suit might start leaking in open space. The real horror is the silence. Endless, absolute silence. When you sit at your console for 8 hours straight, listening to the static of nothingness, and the only reminder that civilization still exists are the weekly reports to Central Command. We had been traveling along the edge of the galaxy for 4 months, the 6 of us on a tiny ship that looked more like a metal can with engines. Captain Reyes, our commander, liked to say that reconnaissance was the poetry of pioneers. Poetry, sure. Every day was the same, scanning an empty sector, checking systems, eating synthetic tube meals that tasted like cardboard soaked in disappointment. Space looks breathtaking in pictures, bright nebulae, clusters of stars, majestic spirals of galaxies. But after months out here, it all turns into screensaver wallpaper you no longer pay attention to. My job was to sit in a cramped compartment, barely the size of a closet, staring at 3 monitors that showed nothing for hours. Green waves on the screens reflecting absolutely nothing. Sometimes I caught myself counting pixels or trying to find shapes in the random static just to keep my brain busy. The psychologist warned us about this monotony before the mission, saying the human mind wasn't designed for such isolation, that we needed hobbies and social contact with the crew. Easy advice to give when you're on Earth, surrounded by billions of people. Our crew was small but reliable. Captain Reyes, a former military man with a face that suggested he'd seen too much and nothing could surprise him anymore. Martha Zhang, our pilot, could land the ship on a needle tip and still joke about being hungover. Dr. Akeem constantly complained about the lack of proper medical gear, even though we hadn't had a single serious case in 4 months. Engineer Thomas could fix anything with duct tape and cursing, and Lena Ivanova, our science officer, still believed we'd eventually discover something meaningful in this emptiness. We became something like a family, though a dysfunctional one, the kind you visit once a year for the holidays and feel relieved when you can finally leave. Only we had nowhere else to go. Then, on the 123rd day of the mission, just as I was thinking that once we got back to Earth, I'd file a report and never go farther than an orbital station again, my console made a sound. Not the usual sensor ping, not a system notification, a real, clear signal. At first I thought it was a glitch, since we were beyond the galaxy's spiral arm, in a sector where absolutely nothing existed. No colonies, no stations, not even automated beacons. But the signal continued, steady and repetitive, with mathematical precision that couldn't be random. I checked the system 3 times, ran diagnostics, even rebooted the equipment. The signal still persisted. It was coming from the intergalactic void, from a place where nothing should exist according to any known laws. I called the captain, and when he looked at the data on my screen, his usually unshakable expression faltered for the first time on this mission. We had just discovered something impossible. The signal was unusual from the start, and I realized that the moment I began examining it, it didn't resemble human transmissions or anything from known alien species, the few we'd encountered over the last century of space exploration. The pattern repeated every 47 seconds with millisecond accuracy, which ruled out any natural origin. I ran it through every decoding protocol I knew, through databases of linguistic algorithms, through recognition systems that should have found at least some kind of structure. Nothing. The computer gave only one result. The signal was artificial, created by an intelligent source, yet it matched no known language or code. Its mathematical design was almost elegant: symmetrical waves, harmonic frequencies, flawless intervals. Someone or something had crafted it deliberately, invested immense energy into this transmission, and sent it into the void. When I showed the data to the crew, everyone reacted differently, and it became our first real disagreement of the entire mission. Lena, our science officer, was ecstatic. Her eyes glowed as if she'd uncovered the holy treasure of astrophysics. She immediately started forming theories, each more far-fetched than the last. An ancient civilization, an intergalactic beacon, a message to future species, technology millennia ahead of ours. Thomas, the engineer, didn't buy it and kept checking the equipment, convinced it was a system malfunction or interference from some unknown radiation. Martha, our pilot, looked at the coordinates of the source and shook her head, saying there was no way we could fly there. Intergalactic emptiness, no reference points, no stars to navigate by, just endless darkness stretching for millions of light years. Dr. Akeem didn't say a word, but I saw him nervously tug at his jacket sleeve, a clear sign he wasn't comfortable with any of this. Captain Reyes gathered us in the mess hall, and for the first time in months, we all sat together discussing something that genuinely mattered. He placed the tablet with the signal data on the table and asked for everyone's opinion. Lena insisted we investigate. She said we couldn't ignore possible first contact with an unknown civilization, that it might be the greatest discovery in human history. Thomas argued our mission was to scout known sectors, not chase phantoms into the intergalactic depths, and that our limited resources made such a detour dangerous. Martha added that her calculations suggested the trip to the source would take weeks, and that was assuming we didn't run into spatial anomalies. I listened quietly, understanding that whatever we decided would change everything. If we reported it to Central Command and left, they'd send an expedition in a year or two, and the signal might be gone by then. If we went ourselves, we were putting everything on the line. The captain sat in silence for about 5 minutes, staring at the data, and I could practically see him weighing every risk and possibility. Then he looked up and said something I'll never forget. He said we were scouts, and our duty was to go where no one else had gone, and that if we feared the unknown every time, we might as well stay on Earth and admire the stars through a telescope. He said yes, it was dangerous, but humanity would never reach other galaxies without taking risks. He gave us 1 hour to prepare and instructed Martha to set a course toward the signal's source. We sent a compressed report to Central Command, a brief message saying we'd detected an anomalous signal and were heading to investigate, coordinates included. We weren't expecting a reply anyway. Communication at this distance came with weeks of delay. I returned to my console, configured the system for continuous signal tracking, and felt something shift inside me. The routine was over. Something entirely new had begun. During the first week of the journey, I could still see the galaxy behind us, a huge glowing spiral shrinking a little more each day. It felt unsettling, like drifting away from the shore and watching the coastline fade into a thin line before vanishing entirely. Only this time it wasn't land disappearing, it was the whole familiar universe. The stars around us grew fewer, dimmer, dissolving into the dark. I spent all my free time at the viewport in the common area, watching this happen, unable to shake the sense that we were crossing some invisible line humans were never meant to cross. Martha teased me for becoming obsessed with the view, but I noticed she often paused at the same viewport, staring at the same emptiness. By the end of the first week, the galaxy looked like a faint smudge, no bigger than my palm held out in front of me. A few days later, it could pass for a distant star. By the second week, we reached true emptiness, and that's when I finally understood what nothing actually meant. Even in the most deserted regions of normal space, there's always something. Distant stars, nebulae, galaxies on the edge of vision, dust that catches light. Here, there was nothing. Complete, overwhelming blackness pressing against your eyes and your thoughts. Lena kept taking measurements and each time repeated that by every physical law there truly was nothing here. Matter density near zero. No radiation, no particles, just expanding intergalactic space. She said we were in a region where the distance between atoms was measured in kilometers. I asked how a signal could even exist here, and she shrugged, saying that was exactly why the whole situation was impossible and therefore fascinating. It didn't make me feel any better. Around the 10th day, the crew began to change. At first it was subtle. Thomas became more irritable, snapping over trivial things, spending too much time in the engine room and checking systems over and over. Dr. Akeem started taking sleeping pills because he couldn't sleep. He said the silence here felt different, heavier, as if it pressed into his skull and wouldn't let his thoughts rest. Martha, usually the cheerful one, grew quiet, staying at the controls and staring into the void ahead even though the ship was on autopilot. Leere kept working with intense focus, recording data and building theories, but I noticed her hands trembling when she thought no one saw. Even Captain Reyes, our steady commander, began checking the navigation more than necessary, as if he feared we'd lose our way in this emptiness and never return. I caught myself staring at the comm screen too often, even though I knew there couldn't be any messages. We were far beyond reach. On the 17th day, something happened that unsettled all of us. Leere completed a full spectral analysis of the surrounding space and called us to show the results. The data was clear. Within millions of light years around us, nothing existed that could generate such a signal. No stars, no planets, no asteroids, not even enough dust. The signal's source, according to her estimates, was still several days ahead, but physically, nothing larger than a grain of sand should exist there. Thomas asked whether it might be some quantum anomaly or a wormhole, but Leere dismissed that. The signal was too steady, too structured. Something was there, something massive and functioning, something that shouldn't exist according to any known universal law. The captain ordered us to continue, but in his eyes I saw what I felt myself. We were flying toward something impossible, and with every passing day the way back stretched farther, while the void around us grew darker and colder. On the 21st day, my console went haywire. The signal that had been steady and consistent suddenly surged hundreds of times stronger. Sensors maxed out and the visualization systems tried to render an image of what lay ahead. I called everyone to the bridge, and we gathered around the main screen, watching the computer process the data. What appeared made everyone fall silent. In the total emptiness where nothing should exist, a structure hung there. Calling it a building was an understatement. It was a construct the size of a small planet, geometrically exact, made of concentric rings and spires stretching hundreds of kilometers. The surface was dark, nearly black, but faint glowing lines ran along it, as if energy flowed through the veins of a colossal organism. Martha swore aloud, Leere gasped, and Thomas simply stood with his mouth open. Captain Reyes said nothing, staring at the screen, his fists slowly clenching. We had found the signal source, and it was impossible. The next hours were spent with Leere feverishly analyzing the data, and each new result made things even stranger. The spectral analysis revealed alloys unknown to nature and impossible for us to create even theoretically. Isotope analysis indicated the structure was over 1 billion years old, plus or minus 100 million. 1 billion years. When this was built, Earth had no multicellular life, only bacteria and algae. And here, in intergalactic emptiness, something or someone created a structure the size of a planet. Leere tried to identify the energy source. The station was clearly active, emitting thermal signatures and running some internal systems. But there were no nuclear reactions, no reactor traces, no antimatter. The energy simply existed, with no explanation. It was like seeing a car running without an engine. Thomas suggested zero-point vacuum energy or a link to dark energy, but admitted it was only speculation, a verbal attempt to rationalize the unexplainable. We flew around the station's perimeter, a journey lasting over 6 hours, revealing its immense size. Thousands of openings covered the surface, resembling docking ports or entrances, though most were sealed. The outer structure looked like layered rings, ring upon ring, level upon level, stretching deep into the construction. Some areas were damaged, likely from unimaginably ancient collisions. Metal was warped and melted, yet the station overall remained almost intact. The eeriest aspect was the total absence of markings. No text, no symbols, no identifiers. Only smooth, cold surfaces and geometric shapes that seemed functional, yet alien. I couldn't shake the feeling that this had been built by beings for whom scale and time had entirely different meanings. The captain ordered us to locate an active airlock, and Martha found one on the outer ring, massive gates the size of our ship, faintly glowing at the edges. We held an emergency meeting, and for the first time, Captain Reyes asked for everyone's opinion before deciding. Thomas was firmly against boarding. He warned we had no idea what awaited inside, from toxic atmospheres to unknown pathogens. The station might be a trap. Dr. Hakim agreed, noting we lacked full medical control for exposure to unknown risks. Lena, of course, insisted on exploration. She argued we couldn't travel 1,000,000 light-years just to turn back without discovering what this was, calling it the discovery of the century, perhaps millennium. Martha said she could keep the ship ready for emergency evacuation, but there were no guarantees if anything went wrong. I stayed silent, torn. Every instinct urged us to leave immediately. Yet we were scouts, and retreat would mean mission failure. The captain considered everyone's input and announced his decision. We were going inside. Minimal team, himself, Lena, and me. Thomas would monitor ship systems, Martha handle the controls, Hakim prepare the medbay for potential emergencies. An hour later, we were ready to board a station 1,000,000,000 years old, in a place where it should not exist at all. When the airlock opened before us, I understood that everything we believed about scale had been wrong. The entrance rose about 300 meters high, maybe more. Our ship could have slipped through it without even brushing the sides. We stood at the edge in our suits, and I felt like an insect before a colossal cathedral. Inside, sensors detected breathable air, which was unbelievable, but the captain still told us to keep our helmets on. We switched on our flashlights and stepped in, and the beams vanished into the endless space. The corridor, if you could call something that vast a corridor, stretched for kilometers, with walls rising so high that the upper part disappeared into darkness. The floor beneath us was perfectly smooth and dark, like polished obsidian, and our steps made no sound, though inside our helmets we could hear our own breathing. Faint, glowing lines pulsed along the walls, slow and steady, as if the station was alive. Lena stopped to collect a sample, and I saw her hand tremble as she touched a surface older than our entire civilization. We walked for more than an hour, and the corridor still continued ahead. The scale was impossible to grasp. This place clearly hadn't been built for beings like us. Sometimes we passed side passages, each the width of a large city avenue. Occasionally we found vast spaces. Calling them rooms felt ridiculous, each as large as a football field and tall as a skyscraper. Completely empty. No objects, no machinery, nothing to hint that anyone had ever lived or worked here. Just smooth walls, a floor, a ceiling lost somewhere above, and those glowing veins running through everything. Lena tried to understand the structure of the place, but she couldn't. It didn't resemble human design or anything known. Too enormous, too empty, too mathematically precise. The captain asked if the signal was getting stronger. I checked the instruments. Yes, we were moving in the right direction, toward the source deeper inside. Thomas contacted us from the ship, asking if everything was all right, and his voice felt strangely comforting in this vast, silent void. The deeper we descended, the more disturbing the station became. We found something like a vertical shaft, a massive well stretching downward for kilometers, with evenly spaced platforms. Gravity felt almost like Earth's, though we had no idea how it was maintained. We went down several levels, and each one was identical to the last. The same colossal corridors, the same empty halls, the same lifeless perfection. No bodies, no bones, no traces of organic material, no tools, no artifacts, no signs of culture. The station was operating, its systems active, but it was completely sterile, as if every trace of its builders had been deliberately erased, or as if no living beings had ever walked here at all. That idea terrified me more than anything. What if this wasn't a home or a base, but something entirely different, built for a purpose we couldn't even imagine? Lena scanned a wall and said the material was the same age everywhere. That meant the entire structure had been created at once, in a single monumental effort, like a single entity. On the 5th level, we finally reached the source of the signal. The corridor opened into a central hall, and its scale surpassed everything we'd seen. The room was so vast that our flashlights couldn't illuminate the far wall, and only faintly touched the ceiling kilometers above. In the center stood a structure, a column or tower built from rotating concentric rings, covered in the same glowing patterns. But here they shone brighter, their rhythm faster. The signal originated from there. My sensors were overwhelmed by the intensity. Not radiation, not a threat, just an impossibly strong stream of data that had been sent out into space for 1 billion years. We moved closer, and I saw panels at the base, surfaces covered with shifting symbols that flowed from one form to another. Leere reached out and touched one. Instantly, everything changed. The signal cut off for a moment. The glowing lines throughout the entire station flared brilliantly, and from deep within came a sound, low, resonant, vibrating through our bones. The station had noticed us. When Leere touched the panel and the station awakened around us, I instantly understood that we had made an enormous mistake. The lights along the walls began to pulse faster. The tower in the center of the hall started rotating with a low hum, and this ancient machine that had slept for 1 billion years suddenly became aware of us. The captain ordered us to retreat, but I couldn't look away from my scanner. The data stream coming from the tower was changing, becoming more organized, almost intentional. It was no longer just a repeating broadcast. It seemed like the station was trying to communicate. Leere grabbed her tablet and started recording everything, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. I watched the symbols on the panels form sequences, shift, repeat, and something in me recognized it as structure. Not randomness, but language. We were standing before a message that had been echoing through space for 1 billion years, and now it had finally found someone to answer. The worst part was that I wasn't sure we wanted to hear it. I spent the next 8 hours at the ship's console, analyzing what Leere had captured. The captain pulled us out of the station at full speed, and once we were back aboard the Whisper, the tension was thick. Everyone knew we had activated something ancient, and now we had to figure out what it was. I ran the data through every decoding system we had, searching for patterns, mathematical sequences, anything that could help. Thomas sat beside me, handling the more complex calculations, while Leere studied the symbols, trying to compare them to known languages. Nothing worked. This wasn't a language shaped by a linear mind. It was something multidimensional, something that did not follow the logic of human thinking. Then Leere proposed something wild. Instead of looking for linguistic meaning, we should examine the mathematical structure, frequencies, intervals, harmonics. After 3 more hours, the pieces finally came together. It wasn't a language in the traditional sense. It was a mathematical formula encoded into waves. And when we transformed it into a visual form, a message appeared. 3 words repeating endlessly. Do not come closer. We stared at the screen in silence, each of us understanding the implications. The station wasn't an invitation or a beacon left behind by some ancient civilization. It was a warning. For 1 billion years, this thing had stood in the void, broadcasting the same message again and again: stay away, do not approach, turn back. And of course, we ignored it. Captain Reyes asked Leere to reanalyze the station's design with this new information in mind. She worked through the entire night, and in the morning she presented results that froze us in place. The structure consisted of concentric barriers, ring after ring, layer after layer, each equipped with its own energy fields and defensive systems. The most alarming part was that all of these barriers were directed inward, not outward. This wasn't a fortress meant to repel attackers. It was a containment system designed to hold something inside. And we had passed through several outer layers and triggered the security protocols. Dr. Hakim finally asked what everyone had been thinking. What could possibly be so dangerous that an ancient civilization built a planet-sized prison in intergalactic emptiness to hold it? Leere had no answer. She only showed deep scans of the inner levels, dozens more barriers, each stronger than the last. And at the very center was something the sensors couldn't identify, an anomaly twisting the space around it. Thomas insisted that we needed to leave immediately, before something happened that we couldn't reverse. If those builders had gone to such extremes to lock something away, Then we had no business being here. Marta added that our systems were already behaving strangely. The computer produced impossible errors, and the navigation data briefly glitched, as if something unfamiliar was probing our systems. When I checked the communication logs, I found several attempts to make unauthorized connections to our network after we returned from the station. Something inside that ancient prison was aware of us and trying to reach our ship. The captain studied the data in silence, and I watched the realization settle on his face. We were in real danger, and the way back might no longer be open. The first sign that something had gone wrong was the lights. The faintly pulsing lines along the walls suddenly sped up, as if the station had been injected with adrenaline. I sat at the console, watching as section by section, level by level, the entire ancient structure came alive. Thomas noticed it first. The station's power usage had increased tenfold in 20 minutes, and systems that had been dormant for 1,000,000 years suddenly switched on. Leere tried to track the activations, but there was too much data changing too quickly. Then came the sounds. First soft and distant, then louder. Dull thuds, scraping metal, something like colossal mechanisms waking from a 1,000,000,000-year slumber. The captain ordered us to prepare for an emergency departure, but Martha shook her head, pointing at the navigation screen. The station was generating a field that interfered with our engines. It didn't stop them completely, but caused disruptions, as if an invisible hand held us in place. We had triggered a security system, and it clearly had no intention of letting us leave. Sensors began detecting movement deep inside the station, and it was terrifying. Not machines, not robots, but something else our instruments couldn't define. Abnormal temperature readings in empty sectors, strange distortions on the scanners, as if something massive moved through the corridors without a defined shape. Leere tried modeling it, but the computer returned contradictory results. The object appeared on one level, vanished, and reappeared kilometers away, sometimes simultaneously in multiple locations. Thomas assumed it was a system glitch, but the data was too consistent, too intentional. Something was moving from the lower levels toward the outer barriers we had breached. The worst part, it wasn't moving randomly but with clear intent, as if it knew exactly where we were. Dr. Hakim asked if it could be automated security, ancient drones or robots, but Leere shook her head. The movement was organic, almost alive. The captain ordered immediate evacuation, and we prepared to leave. But then the unexpected happened. The station's airlocks, the ones we had entered through, began to close. Slowly, relentlessly, massive gates the size of our ship slid shut, cutting off our escape. Martha tried to fire the engines to break free, but the interference field had grown so strong the ship barely moved. Thomas shouted to detach and use impulse thrusters, but the captain stopped him. If we got stuck, we'd be crushed. I watched the gap shrink, the distance to safety narrowing by the second. Leere tried accessing the station systems through the panel she had touched, but nothing responded. The station ignored us, or worse, followed a protocol we had triggered ourselves. A minute before the gates fully closed, the captain ordered everyone strapped in, and Martha pushed the engines to maximum despite the interference. The ship lunged forward, systems screaming under strain, and we shot through the narrowing opening with barely 10 meters to spare. We pulled back to a safe distance, but no one felt relief. The station no longer looked dead. It glowed from within, entire sections pulsing with bright light, energy waves rippling across its surface like the skin of a giant organism. Sensors detected incredible activity, internal barriers opening, containment systems shutting down, and something imprisoned for 1,000,000,000 years, slowly emerging from the core. Leere looked at the readings and quietly said what we all already knew. We hadn't merely discovered an ancient station. We had opened the cell of something so dangerous that a civilization millions of years ahead of us built a prison in the void between galaxies. By being here, by our curiosity, by that one touch on the panel, we had triggered its release. Thomas asked if there was any way to reverse it, but the captain stayed silent, staring at the station. I knew the answer. We couldn't stop something we didn't understand. something built by beings for whom our technology was primitive. The only choice left was to flee and pray that whatever we had unleashed wouldn't reach our galaxy before we could warn humanity. We flew 100 kilometers away from the station and stopped, trying to decide our next move. But Leere didn't give us a chance to rest. She ran a complete structural analysis of the barrier system, and the results made it clear we had made a far graver mistake than we realized. The station was constructed as a series of concentric defense rings, each activating when the previous one was breached. There were 27 in total, each stronger than the last. The critical problem was that when we entered and touched the interface, we didn't just trigger the system. We crossed a vital barrier, the final line separating the outer levels from the inner ones. Leere explained it simply. Imagine a prison with 27 walls, and we had just broken the 26th. Whatever was locked inside was now only one barrier away from freedom. Even worse, our presence, our biological signals, our minds had become triggers for the ancient system. The station was designed to react to intelligent life, and we had provided exactly what it had awaited for 1 billion years. A target, a trail, a path leading to a living civilization. The captain asked if we could somehow close the barrier and restore the defenses, but Thomas shook his head and pointed to the station's energy readings. Activating even one inner barrier demanded energy equivalent to a year's output of a small planet. Our ship's reactor could power a city for a few months at most. We simply couldn't supply the energy needed, even if we knew how to operate the systems. Leere scoured the data for anything about the station's creators and suddenly stopped. She had found something within the structural code of the interface, fragments resembling records or logs. We spent 3 hours decoding them through mathematical patterns, and when the text emerged, I wished we had never discovered it. These weren't instructions or scientific notes. They were warnings, the final messages of the prison's builders. The fragments, filled with despair and terror, spoke of what they called the Devourer. Not a being or organism, but a presence that destroyed civilizations, not physically, but from within. The records were incomplete. Much had been lost over 1 billion years, but what remained painted a terrifying picture. The station's creators were a race that had existed for millions of years, controlled half their galaxy, and reached technological heights we can only imagine. And they encountered it, the Devourer, not an army, fleet, or empire, a single entity that entered star systems and affected intelligent life. They didn't detail exactly what happened, but the fragments indicated it wasn't conventional warfare. Civilizations collapsed internally, minds altered, entire species lost the will to resist, to survive, to exist. One fragment Leere translated was especially chilling. The Devourer didn't kill bodies. It destroyed the desire to live, erased the meaning of existence, turning minds into empty shells. Over 3,000 years, their civilization lost more than half its colonies and realized they could neither defeat nor comprehend the entity. Only one option remained: trap it somewhere. It could never reach new life. The final record dated back to long before Earth existed. 1 billion years ago, the builders completed the prison and lured the Devourer inside. They didn't explain how, only noted they made an unimaginable sacrifice, using themselves as bait, knowing they would not survive. They built the station in the intergalactic void, 1 million light-years from the nearest galaxy, surrounded it with 27 barriers, each intended to hold for centuries, and activated a warning signal to broadcast indefinitely. Do not approach. Stay away. Something that must never be freed is locked here. The last line read like a verdict. If you are reading this, the barriers are breached, and the Devourer is free again. Run, warn your worlds, and pray you fare better than we did. Leere finished reading, and we all sat in silence, grasping the enormity of what we had done. We hadn't just opened an ancient tomb. We had released something that destroyed a civilization capable of building planet-sized prisons, and now it knew where to find a new galaxy filled with intelligent life, ripe for consumption. The captain turned to me and asked how long it would take to send a message to Earth. I checked the calculations and answered, 3 weeks, if we were lucky. He nodded and ordered a priority report prepared. We had to warn humanity, even if it was the last thing we would do. The first contact unfolded nothing like I imagined. No flashes, no noises, no signs at all. At some point I simply understood that thoughts were appearing in my mind that didn't belong to me. I was sitting at the console working on a report for Earth when I noticed myself thinking about concepts I had never explored. Time structure, what consciousness truly is, and how simple it would be to just stop resisting and let something greater enter. I blamed exhaustion at first, the pressure of recent days, but then I saw Leere frozen in the lab, staring at the wall with her lips moving soundlessly as though she were speaking to someone. Thomas was in the engine room, drawing unfamiliar symbols on the wall with a marker, repeating the same shapes until the surface was covered in patterns that felt both chaotic and precise. Dr. Akeem lay in the medbay with his eyes shut, his pupils darting beneath his eyelids as if trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Only the captain still held on. He grabbed my shoulder, shouted in my face, and demanded I wake up, and only then did I realize I'd been sitting still for over an hour, staring at a blank screen with a blinking cursor. We assembled in the mess hall and the captain ordered us to clearly describe what we were experiencing, what we felt, what was happening in our heads. It turned out we were all dealing with the same thing, a presence, unseen but undeniable, slipping into our minds and sifting through our thoughts like someone leafing through a book. Leere said it felt like a cold, alien touch sliding along her brain's folds, tasting her memories and dismantling her emotions to understand them. Thomas said it seemed to be copying his mental structure, creating molds of his personality like taking impressions of a key to forge a duplicate. Dr. Akeem was suffering the most. He said it showed him visions of other worlds and other species that had met the devourer long before us, and he watched them perish not through destruction, but by losing the will to live. Entire planets of beings lying down and simply stopped breathing because they no longer saw a purpose. I described my own thoughts, ideas appearing in my mind that couldn't be mine, and moments when I felt like I wasn't one person anymore, but two. Myself, and something else observing the world through my eyes, trying to learn how to be human. The captain ordered us to isolate from one another. If this entity was using our minds as pathways, then limiting contact might slow its spread. Everyone shut themselves in their cabins. I remained on the bridge to monitor systems. Marta stayed in the control room, and the others remained in their sections. We communicated only via internal comms, short check-ins, every hour. But isolation made no difference. The presence wasn't outside. It had already reached inside, and physical barriers couldn't hold it back. I tried resisting by focusing on simple tasks, counting in my head, running through multiplication tables, recalling poems from school, anything that kept my thoughts busy and blocked it from digging deeper. Sometimes it helped briefly, sometimes longer, but it always returned, stronger and more intent, as if it were learning how to bypass every defense. The worst realization was that the devourer wasn't merely observing us. It was preparing. Every mental intrusion was an experiment, every copied thought a tool. It was studying human consciousness, how we choose, how we feel, how we hope. It was learning to become us, so that when it reached our galaxy, it would know precisely how to destroy humanity from within. On the third day of isolation, Dr. Akeem stopped answering the check-ins. The captain and Thomas forced their way into his cabin and found him on the floor with his back against the wall, eyes open and unfocused. He was alive, breathing, his heart beating, but he wasn't there. The person was gone, leaving a body running on autopilot. They carried him to the medbay and tried to revive him, but nothing reached him. Only his lips moved from time to time, repeating the same words in a language we didn't recognize. Leere recorded the sounds and ran them through the system. It turned out to be one of the old languages used by the station's builders, fragments we had seen in earlier logs. Akeem was repeating one phrase over and over. "It is returning home. It has found the path, and it carries us with it. The captain realized we couldn't remain there. If we stayed, we would all end up like Akeem, empty shells serving as guides for a being using us to find its way to our world. He made the most painful choice of the mission. We would destroy the Whisper and ourselves with it, right here, so the Devourer would never learn where Earth was. But when he attempted to trigger the self-destruct system, nothing responded. The ship ignored every command, as though someone else already controlled it. That was when we understood. It wasn't just inside our minds anymore. It had entered the ship itself, its systems, its computers. We had given it too much time, and now stopping anything was no longer possible. I sat before the main console, staring at the two buttons I had to choose between, knowing that whatever I picked would be the wrong answer. On the left was the emergency reactor overload, a manual trigger that would bypass all system locks and destroy the ship 30 seconds after activation. On the right was the emergency hyperspace jump, our final chance to break free and attempt to return home. Captain Reyes stood behind me with his hand on my chair, silent, because the decision was mine. I was the communications officer. I was the one who found that damned signal, the one who insisted we decode it, the first to touch the station's interface. It was my mistake, and now I had to repair it. Lena sat in the corner of the control room, holding her head and crying quietly, saying it was her fault for activating the system. But we all knew the truth. All of us were responsible. Each of us pushed forward when we could have stopped. Thomas was running one final check of the ship's systems, searching for a way around the lock the Devourer had set, but it was pointless. The presence controlled too much. Marta sat at the helm, looking out the viewport toward the station, toward that massive prison that no longer appeared lifeless. It pulsed with light, breathed with energy, preparing to release its captive into a galaxy filled with new life to consume. If I pressed the left button, we would all die here in the intergalactic void, and no one would ever know what happened. Our last message reached Earth 3 days earlier, a short transmission saying we'd discovered an ancient station and were starting our investigation. In 20 or 30 years, Central Command might send a team to our coordinates and find only debris and a silent station. Maybe they would be wiser than we were, read the warning, and leave. Or maybe they would repeat our mistakes and awaken what was supposed to remain dormant. But if we destroyed the ship now, the Devourer would lose all the information it took from us. Star charts, Earth's location, our society's structure, everything it had taken from our minds. It would remain here in this emptiness, perhaps for 1,000,000 years, perhaps forever, until someone else repeated the same error. It was the correct choice, the noble one. The one that would save billions at the price of 6 lives. The captain would support it. The station's builders would approve. Any rational person would agree. But my hand refused to rise to the left button because I didn't want to die. Not here, not like this, not in the silent darkness between galaxies where no one would ever even find our remains. The right button was both a promise and a curse. One hyperspace jump and we would be halfway home, toward safety, toward a chance to survive and warn humanity about what we found. But the Devourer was inside us, inside the ship, and if we returned, it would return as well. It already knew where Earth was. It had studied our thoughts enough to understand human civilization, our weaknesses, our fears, the ways to break us from the inside. We would become the path through which that ancient horror entered our galaxy, and billions would die not from weapons or fire, but by simply losing the will to continue living. I would be the one who brought it, the one cursed in history if anyone survived long enough to write it. But we could warn them, give humanity a chance to prepare, to resist, maybe even defeat what the station's builders couldn't. Lena said we had an advantage. We knew its nature. We saw the records. We understood the threat. Maybe that would be enough. Or maybe I was just trying to justify not pressing the self-destruct because I wanted to live. I looked through the viewport at the station, at that ancient prison created by a civilization long gone, and suddenly felt that the emptiness around us didn't feel empty anymore. Something was out there, unseen, watching us. waiting for my choice, as if everything had been arranged for this moment. The devourer wasn't just observing us, it was examining us, judging whether we were worthy prey or too insignificant to matter. The captain quietly said that whatever I chose, he would accept it, that the decision was mine, and no one would blame me. But I knew it wasn't true. I would blame myself for the rest of my life, however long or short that might be. My hand hovered between the two buttons, my fingers shaking, and deep inside I felt the devourer studying my hesitation, learning about humanity through this struggle, learning what drives us, duty or self-preservation, sacrifice or hope that fate might show mercy. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and my hand moved toward one of the buttons. But I never learned which one, because in that instant, every system on the ship shut down, and we were consumed by total darkness and silence, the kind of silence that is the most terrifying sound in space.